Hey, what's going on, guys? So we have something a little different for you this week here. It just didn't work right. We had some issues with my hard drive failure, and the video was just corrupted and it's unusable. So I was really excited to show this to you because it was like a team building session. Like as the crew explored the Black Wings, there was some fun little hijinks the crew got into and really like bonded as a crew. So it really sucks that we don't have it. Thankfully, our friend Anthony, aka Hobbes, is a very talented writer and managed to write up this kind of little narrative based on the first-person view from Hobbes. And I got him to record a voiceover for it, and we're just gonna stick it in like an ECHOcast, like a Tales from the ECHOnet kind of deal here, where he's gonna read it. We're throwing it over like a little video that just has like some little visual clues that just kind of make it something good to focus your attention on. But that's what we're going to be doing this week. We're going to hurry up and get Chapter 8 out to you, which our crew arrives on Pandora. But before we get to that and the ensuing chaos that takes place once we get there, we're just going to be showing you this little Tales from the ECHOnet for Chapter 7. So I do hope you enjoy. I'm sorry that we don't have the proper video for it, but I thought this would just be a little fun way to kind of pass on what happened in this session, at least in a short form narrative segment. So thank you again, everyone that watches and stick with us. We really appreciate it. The channel continues to grow little by little, and we're very excited. We're always happy to bring this story. We're very pleased with this game that we made and the story that we're telling, and I'm so happy that other people are finding joy in it. But thank you again, and we'll see you next time for Chapter 8 as our crew sets foot on Pandora.
So, you want to hear a story? Well, have I got one for you?
A lot of people around here with guns, so kind of helps to have an itchy trigger finger.
Do you know that it takes approximately 7 pounds of pressure to rip one of these bad boys off?
As soon as he clocks that, he just darts for the shadows.
As a, deep, cynical character flaw, I pretty much assume everybody's hiding something all the time.
My boss was like, "Oh, you gotta fight this guy, or you're gonna get another bullet in the head." And I was like, "Okay."
Just starting off with a bang, this is Borderlands.
Space is cold. Really fucking cold. Nearly every ship or space station that Hobbes had ever spent time on has been uncomfortably cold. So the first thing he noticed about sub-level 1 of Fia is the fact it was surprisingly warm. Home to the infamous Black Wings, the party had made their way down here to discuss a job with their captain, Sharon Odessa. The air was thicker here than it was in the neutral zone, and pungent, with a mix of static, smoke, and sweaty fog. It was acrid and peppery on the lungs, but it had an almost fruity aroma that gave a tingly nicotine sort of buzz after a few minutes. There wasn't much in the way of formal security, save for the dozens of space pirate types that they passed, in various states of intoxicated and disagreeable. Perhaps the labyrinthine layout of the level was the only security needed. Captain Abigail had led them through a maze of catwalks and gangways, down narrow passages, along dead ends, and over deadfalls. The entire level, from the buildings to the floor planks, seemed to be a patchwork of broken ships, vehicles, and other salvaged parts and scrap, piecemealed together and built over itself in layers upon winding layers. Fidget muttered a constant stream of thought aloud as we walked, mentioning 100 different obscure bits of tech and antique ship parts seen along the way. The ramshackle aesthetic and pleasant warmth meshed well with the general mirth of the Blackwing crew. As the party arrived at the captain's aisle, somewhere deep in the core of this complex, they found themselves in a wild party atmosphere, complete with music, singing, dancing, fighting, and all the drugs and spirits a soul could seek. Captain Odessa had extended us her hospitality after accepting the job to find Tracer Vlad and the valuable iridium salts he had in his possession. Hobbes, for one, was eager at the chance for some leisure, debauchery, substance abuse, whatever other revelry there was to be had amongst the Blackwings. For the first time since arriving in Fia, this place felt safe enough to let our guard down for a few hours. Duck seemed to be leaning into the occasion, picking up a number of recreational goodies from a very pushy peddler of various intoxicants. Kimmy, who was typically the one conducting the interviews, found herself being interrogated by excited Blackwings about her recent casts. Did you really blag the Golden Bank? Were you really out settling the station with Iron Clive? Do your tentacles move on their own, or can you control them? Despite seeming a little taken aback, there was a definite sense of pride hidden under her polite smile. Kimmy was meeting some of her real fans. Hobbes fetched himself a drink, and with a mug of lukewarm grog in hand, he moved in the direction of a raucous group forming up nearby. He shouldered his way through the crowd to find Tegan seated at an upturned barrel across from an enormous, muscle-bound meathead with tattoos covering his entire upper half from chin to waist. They were sizing one another up as they began to lock grips in apparent preparation for an arm wrestling match. All around were the sounds of bets being taken or insults and jeers being hurled. As Hobbes approached the table, he could see a look of calm amusement on Tegan's face as she looked over her hefty opponent. A small heap of money, drugs, ammunition, and other small trinkets of value were piled up on another barrel next to them, and the meathead dismissively looked around the crowd as they readied themselves to begin. Over the din, Hobbes could just make out the last bits of some condescending banter he'd been spewing at Tegan. And you look fucking stupid. If you're half as strong as you are stupid, you might make this interesting for old Copper. The placid look on Tegan's face didn't change in the slightest as she awaited the signal to begin. A bald man with a knee-length beard who'd been collecting the majority of the wagers for this match announced that they would begin on his mark. The very instant he raised his hand off theirs and shouted to start, a loud crack echoed out over the noisy onlookers. With a sharp twist of her grip, Tegan had snapped old Copper's wrist like a piece of straw. He squealed out in pain as she drove his arm into the barrel, spilling him from his seat in the process. Tegan smiled in a way that didn't seem particularly amused, then dumped the rest of her drink onto her arrogant opponent as he writhed on the floor, clutching his shattered wrist. She calmly stood up, finished the remainder of Copper's mug in one gulp, then looked down at him and said, "If you were half as strong as you are ugly, that wouldn't have been so boring. Oh, and who looks stupid now?" As she strolled confidently away from the table, the now quieted crowd parted quickly to make a path for her. Hobbes spotted a gaming table through the dispersing bodies and made for it with vigor. For the first time in a long time, he could stand to lose some cash, or better yet, pluck a few black-winged pigeons absolutely featherless. The stakes certainly seemed interesting enough. There was plenty of commotion and hostility around the table. He was still 20 or so paces away when someone bumped the table, causing a few coins to fall to the floor. He hadn't noticed the little girl crouched nearby until she stood and snatched up a single coin that rolled straight to her, and the even smaller boy holding her by the leg. She barely had a chance to smile at her good fortune before some brute from the gambler's table stood over her. He was fat, apparently drunk, and wearing what could best be described as heavily soiled canvas pajamas. Hobbes couldn't make out what he shouted at the little girl before he landed a vicious backhand across her face with his meaty hand adorned with 3 large gemstone rings. He feinted like he might also kick the already cowering child before bending down and picking up the single coin. Something about seeing that slovenly prick attacking 2 helpless kids triggered something in Hobbes, so much so that he found himself pawing for his Jacobs. Before Hobbes could close the distance or introduce anyone to Jolene, Duck appeared suddenly from behind the abusive drunk and was making his way over to these now crying children. Duck knelt down beside them, though we didn't really need to, saying something inaudible over the surrounding chaos. Then he took the young girl's hand, turned it up, and placed a cred stick and 3 large gemstone rings in her palm, the exact same stones that had just lit her cheek red. Somehow, Duck had also seen the incident, and in the time it took that asshole pirate to turn around, he'd robbed that greasy pig silly. Hobbes was close enough now to hear Duck tell the children, "Don't you worry about it. He absolutely stole these first anyway, and he won't even remember where he lives in the morning, let alone what you look like. Go buy yourselves a full belly." As they ran off, Duck noticed Hobbes, and for a moment almost looked a bit ashamed. Was he embarrassed that he'd been caught being sentimental, showed these strange kids kindness for nothing? No. He just didn't realize anyone had seen. Not only had it been an act of unreciprocated kindness, but he had expected it would go entirely without notice or thanks. How different this new crew was than any of the men or women Hobbes had done work with in the past. Hoping to put him at ease, Hobbes said, "That was pretty heroic of you. You just saved that fat bastard from being pistol whipped half to death." Duck cracked a smile at that and replied, "Guy like that probably gets his ass kicked all the time. Hopefully the bad karma actually stays with him for a while." Before Hobbes could respond, he felt a powerful hand on his shoulder and he spun away quickly, reaching for his holster. He found Tegan standing there, grinning at him, clearly amused at his panicked reaction. Kimmy was with her, and she half shouted at them to be heard over the party. "There you 2 are. Good to see you're both intact, at least literally." She was looking skeptically at Hobbes after his overreaction, possibly trying to determine if he was high on something. "Have either of you seen Fidget?" The 4 of us exchanged glances while shaking our heads, to which Tegan added, "All right, guys, that's our child we just let disappear into this crowd. It's a very low bar to be a better parent than my parents. Let's keep an eye out." They all nodded and split up, and as Hobbes passed the gaming table that he'd been heading toward, he noticed that same abusive pirate now suffering a random wardrobe malfunction, fighting a losing battle to keep his dirty pants up as the other players howled with laughter. There were certainly sights to see in Blackwing territory, and they really only had a chance to scratch the surface on this visit. Hobbes passed through an entire casino floor with various table games and computer-based gaming machines. He passed a professional-looking brewery and at least a half-dozen makeshift stills, all of which were surrounded by obviously pickled Blackwing crew in the midst of drunken revelry. He passed a particularly stupid pair who seemed to be taking turns shooting empty bottles off one another's head, which was sure to get interesting in only a couple of rounds if he'd been able to stay and watch. But Hobbes ignored the party for the time being, focusing his attention on finding Fidget. It occurred to him in the moment that he hadn't been ordered to find their missing companion. His crewmates had suggested it, and he felt a sense of responsibility to them and to Fidget. No coercion, no threat of violence or pain, no reward. He simply felt a desire to cooperate with this group, possibly even a desire to protect them. Odd as it seemed, he was beginning to feel a genuine sense of allegiance to these people and their new captain, without the need for a stick or carrot or a kennel full of hungry skags. He couldn't remember feeling a sense of belonging to a group like this since he was a kid on the street, multiple lifetimes ago now. Hobbes was stirred from his musings by the sound of a familiar voice, a tinny-sounding voice issuing from a gas mask, explaining something technical in an exasperated tone. he spotted Fidget talking down to a pair of much taller Blackwings, all of them observing some large piece of unfamiliar tech. I'm telling you, this thing is casting enough radiation to make everyone on this level sterile in a few years tops. The real irony is this thing is an air purifier made for a Euclid-class starship, but the air in this place is like the exhaust from a Euclid-class starship. Fine, go ahead, said the lanky man with an orange bandana on his head. You stop the leak, and you can keep that sparkly dust you are scraping out from under my shack. Without another word, Fidget's top half disappeared into a hatch near the bottom of this weird little spire-looking machine with a tall antenna. Small machine parts and muffled curse words came flying out of the hatch every few seconds, but in just a couple minutes, the whole unit came alive and began to make an even humming sound as purple indicator lights appeared up one side. Fidget popped back out of the machine and nodded at the Blackwings, and then noticed Hobbes and headed in his direction. Pleasure doing business with you, Fidget said back to them before turning to Hobbes and saying in a muffled tone, and thanks for the quasarized Cobaltemonite, suckers. If they had any idea how valuable this stuff is, they would have never agreed to part with it so easily. I'm gonna guess most of these people would rather be rich than fertile anyway. I got 14 grams of powdered QC from the bottom of that defunct nebula engine that the idiot sleeps on. I didn't bother to mention he's almost certainly sterile already. Probably for the best. The rest of the group wanted to know where you disappeared to, said Hobbes. They're probably being overcautious, but I do feel like I already passed through here twice and couldn't find you. You good? Just out collecting interesting scrap? Fidget looked down at the floor, emotions concealed by the expressionless gas mask. Still, Hobbes got the sense there was something being left unsaid. Fidget replied with weak enthusiasm, Well, yeah, you know how high the radiation shielding rate is if you alloy the stuff into metal? Plus, I found these crystallized boson diodes which improve signal integrity, and they cut through interference like... You sure about that, kid? Hobbes cut in. I don't mean to pry, but hunting for rare scrap components seems like an activity that Kimmy or Zoe would have been happy to join you for. I know this group would be willing to help if there's something else going on. We all have complicated backgrounds, but I really think you can trust these guys have your best interests in mind. You sure you're good? Fidget gently kicked at the air, looking down at the ground and murmuring a nervous sound. After a few moments of hesitation, they turned back to Hobbes and said reluctantly, Okay, so I took off for a bit because I was looking for some information I need. I found a bookstore and I was just being thorough to make sure I didn't miss anything. Hobbes stared into the visor of the mask, seeing his own skeptical expression looking back at him. Suddenly he burst out laughing. All right, kid, you don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready, but you should consider opening up to Kimmy and Tegan if you want to. They really care, like, actually, and you definitely need to work on your lying. I'm not sure how many Blackwings we've met could actually read a book if they knew what one was. Nobody is going to believe you went book shopping in a pirate shanty town. Come on, let's go find the others. Hobbes turned and started walking back in the direction of the captain's aisle, still chuckling to himself. Fidget paused another moment and reached into an inner pocket to feel the book, a reminder that it was real. Snorting a laugh through the mask, Fidget hop-stepped and hurried after Hobbes, feeling ready to rejoin their strange little group and appreciative of this unfamiliar feeling of safety that came from traveling together.